Cabinet meeting. This is not a public meeting, but a meeting the public can attend. I am Councillor Glyn Jones, Deputy Mayor of Doncaster, and I would like to welcome you all to today's meeting. Before we commence proceedings, I would like to outline the domestic arrangements for the meeting. We are not expecting a fire practice today. If the alarm sounds, please leave the building. This meeting will be recorded and published on the Council's website. By entering the Council chamber, you are accepting that you will be recorded and your images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. If anyone intends to record today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode. Thank you. I will now commence the meeting. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have received apologies for absence from Mayor Ros Jones and Councillor Joe Blackham. Are there any further apologies for absence? Thank you. Okay, item 2, exclusion of the public and press. There are no items on the agenda where the public and press are to be excluded. Is that agreed? Okay, item 3, public statements and questions. I'm told we have no public questions or statements. Okay, item 4, are there any declarations of interest, please? I can see none. However, I feel I must declare an interest in the fact that to my wife's enjoyment, she's because we do go out to the bingo. So I'm a member of a number of bingo clubs. That's what you do when you get to my age. Okay, so I will be completing a declaration form and return that to Governance Services. Item 5, decision records from the meeting held on the 11th of September 2024. These have been previously circulated and are for noting only. Is that agreed? Okay. Agenda item 6, Statement of Licensing Policy 2025, the Gambling Act 2005. As Joe Blackham has submitted his apologies for today, I will introduce the report on his behalf. Under the Gambling Act 2005, licensing authorities are required to produce and publish a statement of licensing policy and to review the policy every 3 years. The policy sets out the steps which applicants need to take in order to be reasonably consistent with the 3 licensing objectives, which are preventing gambling from being a source of crime or disorder, being associated with crime or disorder, being used to support crime, ensuring that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way, protecting children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. It also sets the basis for all relevant licensing decisions over the next 3-year period, including how the licensing committee will conduct hearings for applications which cannot otherwise be resolved. This is the 7th version of the policy, and other than some administrative changes and minor additions identified through consultation, the policy remains largely unchanged from the current version. The decision to adopt the revised policy is scheduled to be taken by full council in November. Failing to review or adopt the policy has the potential to create risk to the local authority, who as a result may not be able to discharge its functions under the Gambling Act 2005. It is recommended that the members of the Cabinet note the response to the consultation and the reviewed Statement of Licensing Policy, Gambling Act 2005, with a view to it being adopted by full council. Thank you. I will now ask Cabinet members to indicate by raising their hand if they wish to ask any questions in relation to this item. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just, I suppose, a few words of support, really, in terms of this policy. What's refreshing to see, certainly on page 35 of the policy, is the now robust actions put in place to reduce gambling harm. And I sincerely welcome that. Also, the inclusion of the referral and signposting to agencies and organisations that potentially will provide support for individuals. So I just wanted to say it's a welcome notice, and obviously those inclusions are extremely positive for individuals that obviously that may need support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Are there any more questions and comments? I've got a comment, if I may. It's a small, minor comment, but I noticed that there's track changes on the document that is included within this report, and I noticed someone's probably had their American spelling on spell check on there, and it's put endeavour in the American way of spelling rather than the English way of spelling. So, unless there's any good reason for that at all.
I'm sure we can insert a U, not that there are many of those turning up at the moment.
Thank you for that, Damien. Okay. I will now read out the recommendations within the report. That Cabinet agrees to note the response to the consultation and the reviewed Statement of Licensing Policy Gambling Act 2005 and recommend it to full council for adoption. Is that moved? Seconded? Okay, the recommendations are agreed. Thank you. We move on to item 7, securing habitat banks on private land. I will ask Councillor Phil Cole, Cabinet Member for Finance, Traded Services and Planning, to introduce this report. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. This report to Cabinet is about the ways in which biodiversity net gain can be achieved within our planning system. Biodiversity net gain is an approach to development that ensures that habitats for wildlife are left in a measurably better state than they were before the development. In England, biodiversity net gain is mandated under Section 7A of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as inserted by Schedule 14 of the Environment Act 2021. Developers must deliver a biodiversity net gain of 10%. Now, where developers cannot achieve this on the site they're developing, they can provide that environmental uplift by purchasing units of land in habitat banks. These are areas of land which can see a significant uplift in biodiversity over a period of years and are set aside for that purpose. This council is already doing a variety of work on both biodiversity net gain and habitat banks. This morning's report is about a narrow but important part of our biodiversity net gain offer. It considers new ways in which the council can use legal agreements, such as Section 106 agreements or conservation covenants, to secure habitat banks. Section 106 agreements are currently used as part of planning applications. Many councillors will be familiar with them, requiring developers to make provision for things such as schools or affordable housing in order to make their development more acceptable. This report considers using Section 106 agreements in a new way to secure large habitat banks, with the legal agreement just between the council and the habitat bank owner, rather than the developer. As these agreements would only deal with biodiversity net gain and would not reference any particular planning application, the habitat bank can then provide units for lots of different developments without each of them needing their own Section 106 agreement. The report also discusses the circumstances where we would use new legal agreements known as conservation covenants to secure habitat banks. These might be used in the rare circumstances where we want to secure a habitat bank that straddled land across the council's boundary, so partially in another local authority area, or where we help a neighbouring local authority to legally secure a habitat bank on land that they own. I'm pleased to announce that since this report was drafted, the new Labour government has just confirmed that the council's application to become a responsible body for the purpose of conservation covenants has been successful. This makes City of Doncaster Council one of just 13 designated responsible bodies now able to enter into conservation covenant agreements with landowners in England. We are one of only 7 councils in the country to be designated to date. Finally, the report proposes that the council sets new fees to cover our costs in relation to these legal agreements. The first fee would cover the costs of officer time to do the necessary due diligence work behind deciding if we should enter a Section 106 agreement or conservation covenant with a private landowner. The second fee covers the cost of monitoring the success of habitat delivery over the subsequent 30 years. With that said, I ask the Cabinet to support this report and its recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. I will now ask the Cabinet members to indicate by raising their hand if they wish to ask any questions in relation to this item. Councillor Holbrook.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to fully support and endorse this important initiative. The work we are already doing adjacent to Sandalbeat Wood and Doncaster Racecourse is making great strides towards increasing biodiversity net gain in our city. Over the last 3 years, I am pleased to announce we have reached the threshold of 250,000 trees planted in as part of the Mayor's Million Tree Challenge. This achievement adds to the importance being placed on increasing biodiversity. I commend this report and also ask Cabinet to support the recommendations as contained in the document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any more questions or comments, colleagues? Okay, I will now read out the recommendations within the report. Cabinet members are asked to note that this report discusses using Section 106 agreements in a new way to legally secure large habitat banks that are not linked to a specific planning application or development. It also discusses the circumstances where we might use a conservation covenant to secure habitat banks. Members of Cabinet are recommended to 1. Delegate the power to enter into either Section 106 agreements or conservation covenants that secure private habitat banks, BNG, biodiversity net gain projects on land owned by neighbouring planning authorities, or off-site BNG projects that straddle the local authority boundary to the Director of Place in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning. Number 2, approve the use of a price on application fee for entering into either Section 106 agreements or conservation covenants that secure private habitat banks, BNG projects on land owned by neighbouring planning authorities, or off-site BNG projects that straddle the local authority boundary, and 3, approve the proposed method for calculating fees to cover the costs of monitoring on and off-site biodiversity net gains and including this within the Section 106 agreements or conservation covenants. Is that moved? Is that seconded? Okay, that recommendation is agreed. That concludes the item of business on the agenda today, and I would like to thank everyone for their attendance and input. I will now close the meeting. Thank you.